Hi everyone, my name is Jill Losh. I'm a fifth year PhD student in the microbiology program here at GSBS. And I'd like to welcome you guys today to this GSBS Career Development Series seminar. Today we're going to be focusing on the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. After Barbara's talk today, there'll be a short Q&A session. And then afterwards, please feel free to stay and network with your fellow attendees. And there's food if you didn't already get some. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our Assistant Director of Career Development, Sina Safai, for his efforts to introduce us to new opportunities. Also, thank you to the MD Anderson Postdoc Association and the Baylor College of Medicine's Career Development Center for their partnership in this event. So the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship offers an opportunity for scientists and physicians to learn about and contribute to the federal policymaking process in the different branches of government. So today we welcome Executive Branch Fellow Dr. Barbara Natalizio. After receiving her bachelor's degree in biochemistry and history from Montclair State University, Barbara attained her PhD in molecular genetics and microbiology from Duke. After graduation, she was a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Cell and Developmental Biology at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. And during this time, she was a member of the executive committee of the Vanderbilt Postdoctoral Association and a member of the board of directors of the National Postdoctoral Association. This highlights her interest in professional development for early career scientists and career transitions. Additionally, she attended the 2013 Summer Institute at the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science, and Barbara then began her AAAS Fellowship in 2015 and is currently at the National Science Foundation in the Directorate for Education and Human Resources Division of Graduate Education. So thank you, Barbara, for being with us today.
Am I good? All right, excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jill, for introducing me. As Jill said, I want to make sure that I'm not blocking the screen, so I'll try and step back here. I'm Barbara Natalizio. I'm currently a AAAS Fellow in the Division of Graduate Education at the National Science Foundation, and I am actually nearing the end of my fellowship, so I've been there for about 2 years. And I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about science policy, just in case there are those in the room who are just like, I know the science policy thing. I'm not necessarily sure what it is, but it sounds kind of interesting. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll talk mostly about the AAAS Science Policy Fellowship, and a little bit more about the details of that in particular. And then I would love to open it up to you guys and answer any questions that you might have. So as a disclaimer, of course, I need to say the opinions, finding conclusions given in this presentation are those of my own and not necessarily those of the American Association for the Advancement of Science or those of the National Science Foundation. And with that, we can get started. So the agenda for today, again, we're going to talk about the what, why, and who of science policy. Then I'm going to tell a little bit about my personal story. Jill already told a little bit of my journey. Of course, as most people who give career talks, it's going to be a little bit out of the ordinary, but I'm going to try and explain to you how some of that out of the ordinary things actually have benefited me along the way. And then I'll talk a lot about the fellowship in particular, about the details, specifically about serving society and the placements, areas of interest as well. We'll talk a little bit about the professional development that is actually offered to the Science Policy Fellows, because the fellowship is actually a professional development opportunity for the fellows themselves. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you can be a more competitive candidate if this is something that you're interested in doing. So specifically, what is science policy? So science policy is like cloaked in some sort of mystery. And so I will say that of all the AAAS fellows, when we go ahead and look at these job descriptions and the job descriptions say experience with science policy, we often say, what exactly does that mean? Because that could entail so many different things. So national science policy refers to this set of rules, regulations, policies, guidelines, methods under which scientific research is conducted, okay? But it also refers to the dynamic, interactive, collaborative process by which all of these rules and regulations are discussed and talked about with the internal and external stakeholders and what those discussions are about. And it's really about how these practices guidelines are actually devised and then implemented. And we'll talk a little bit about that too when we talk a little bit more about the legislative branch versus the executive branch. And so why do we do science policy? Well, obviously we do science policy to encourage policymakers to prioritize science in the federal budget. And as we all are aware, this is something that's of extreme interest at the moment. We all want for science to be supported by the federal government, and science policy is one way in which we can do that. We also want to be sure that we're actually optimizing the use of federal funds to advance science progression, right? We want to make sure that we're advancing science. We want to make sure that we're focusing on broadening participation. NSF does a lot of work with broadening participation. It's actually one of the stipulations of their proposals that you submit to NSF. You want to make sure that the programs and the facilities that are being supported by federal funds are the ones that are best serving society. You also want to make sure that evaluating whether the structures that are supporting academic science at the institutions of higher education are actually aligning with what's going on in government. And so, as we all know, right, there you have government and you have universities and you have industry and nonprofit, right? And all of these things can be very siloed. All right, so it's science policy that actually can bring them together, make sure that they're cross-talking with one another, make sure that they're collaborating, so we're not reinventing the wheel all the time. So when we talk about who makes science policy, so there are lots of people involved with making science policy. So you have at the top of the pyramid, you're going to have the White House, okay? And so underneath the White House, you're going to have the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, and then you have OSTP, which is the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And OSTP is a little bit short-staffed at the moment right now, but we're getting that up and running with the administration transition, and hopefully there will be more people in that space soon. We also have Congress, so you're going to have the legislative part. So you're going to have members of Congress, you're going to have their staff, and you're going to have congressional support agencies. So like the Government Accountability Office are going to work with Congress in order to support science policy efforts. And then you also have the executive branch. So the executive branch is going to be all your federal agencies. These are just a few of the federal agencies. So you have NSF, you have HHS, which is Health and Human Services, under which is the NIH. And then you have DOD, so Energy, NASA, Defense, EPA, NIST, NOAA, USGS, so all of these federal agencies. And then you also have the judicial branches. They're also involved with policy as well. And then you have places like the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, who bring together groups of experts to get together on a topic and provide recommendations, write reports about things that are very pivotal and very timely. So they write these reports, and then those reports are used to inform the policy decisions that are made. And so scientific societies, so anything like your ASCB, like your cell biology, like your biochemistry, molecular biology, those are specific to my discipline, so I know those. Higher education associations, so there's lots of higher education associations, which are actually, a lot of them are in DC, APLU, AAU, right? All of these people are also contributing to science policy, and Washington, DC think tanks. So one of the things that if you're kind of interested in understanding, at least in terms of your scientific society, what their stance on science policy is or on certain particular issues, you can usually go to their web pages and click, they usually have a tab that says advocacy or something like that, and then you can actually read some of the memos that they send to Congress or that they're sending to the White House that gives you an idea about what their stance is on certain particular issues. And so that's kind of interesting if you're interested in understanding that aspect of your professional society more than just, they get people together for an annual meeting. So, roles of the legislative and executive branches. So, we're going to bring you back to, I don't know, junior high, maybe before that, and think really, really simplistically about what the executive branch and the legislative branch do. And so, the legislative branch is going to write your laws and set your budgets. And then the executive branch is responsible for, okay, now that we have a budget, what do we do, right? How do we implement policy, right, that can fit within those budget constraints? And so that is really what the federal agencies do. Is they're all about the detail, and Congress is all about the 10,000-foot picture. This is the money that we're going to give you. These are the laws that we're making, and now implement it. So and I like this quote here at the bottom. So, the science policy establishment is dominated by attorneys and politicians who are really, really competent people, except they know very little about science. And so it's our responsibility as a scientific community, right, to make sure that they know about science and they know what we need as a scientific community in order to progress the science forward, because they may or may not know, right? They don't know. That's not their area of expertise, but it's our area of expertise, so we can inform their decisions. And so when we think about that, so I just wanted to give a little bit of a short conversation about some of my journey to the AAAS fellowship. So what I will say as a disclaimer before I even start is that I graduated with my PhD in 2008, and I did not start the fellowship until 2015. So I had 7 years in between getting my PhD and transitioning into the fellowship. So when I talk about some of these things, don't be completely overwhelmed and don't say, oh my gosh, there's a lot of things there, because I had a lot of years to accumulate the experiences that I had. So you certainly do not need all of these, different types of experiences. They're all different and across the board. So yeah, so I would say that, as Jill mentioned, I went to a small liberal arts college in New Jersey when I first started off as undergrad. I then transitioned to be a lab tech for a year at the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey. And then I attended Duke for graduate school. After graduate school, as some of you may or may not be willing to relate, I was pretty burned out. I was pretty burned out, and I said, I need a break from the bench for a little while. During my graduate school, I had gotten certified as an EMT, so an emergency medical technician, because I was very interested in clinical aspects of things. So my background is in microbiology. I was very interested in clinical things. And so I was like, do I want to pursue an MD? Is that what I want to do? I'm not sure. And so I ended up actually working in the ER. I worked in the emergency room. I worked as an EMT for about a year and a half or so. The ultimate decision after I did that was, gee, I don't really think I'm fit for patient care. I don't actually think that my contribution to society is that I should be in patient healthcare. So I said, okay, we're going to reframe the situation again. And so at that point, I had an opportunity to work as an adjunct professor. It was something that I really loved doing. I taught general biology, I taught microbiology, I taught anatomy and physiology at 3 different schools in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. So there were days of the week that I was driving 5 hours out of the day. So it was a pretty long haul some days. And at that point, I said, you know what, I'm really interested in teaching as a career. I wanted to transition to be a professor in a primarily undergraduate institution because I still have this love of teaching. And I said, okay, I'm going to go do a postdoc. And so that's when I started my postdoc at Vanderbilt University. And during my time there at Vanderbilt, it was a very transformative time for me. So I was very fortunate to be at Vanderbilt when they had actually been awarded an NIH BEST grant. So BEST, for those who are not familiar, is broadening experiences in scientific training. And so it provides funding for doing things just like this, right? For bringing people in and talking about non-academic careers, for helping people out writing grants and providing this other types of programming in addition to the programming that's specific to your discipline. And so I really had a lot of exposure to all sorts of different things, including science policy. while I was at Vanderbilt. And I was also head of the Postdoc Association, and that gave me a lot of networking experience and a lot of exposure to all sorts of people. And so during my time there, I actually did what was called the Tech Venture Challenge. And so the Tech Venture Challenge was a business plan competition that really allowed for me to work with an interdisciplinary team. And so I would encourage any of you, if you do have an opportunity to do something like this, where you do work with a truly interdisciplinary team. Our team was made of like different scientists from different areas, and then we had a law student and a business student. And so it was really all about the communication between our group and understanding how we can communicate with each other to write an executive summary and pitch that product to angel investors and kind of carry out through this 8 to 10 week competition, which was really, really great. But it really provided me with that interdisciplinary team experience, which I thought was very important for me ultimately when I applied for the fellowship, because that's what you're doing. You're communicating to non-scientific audiences, you're working with them, you're trying to work together in these teams that are made of people in all sorts of different disciplines. So, and with all different backgrounds. I also got a certificate in college teaching while I was there. As Jill mentioned, I was one of the first cohorts, not the first, but one of the first cohorts to go to the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science in their summer institute. And that was also, I hate to use the word again, but transformative experience for me. It definitely, I mean, I got hooked on the science communication. I loved it. I loved talking about my science to non-scientific audiences. And like every chance I get, I talk to people all the time. Just because every time you do it, you get better and better. And it does help you with the policy side of things actually as well. So as a result of that, I came back to the undergraduate campus at Vandy, and we put together a communicating ideas workshop. And that was something that I did back at Vandy. And I will say with the National Postdoctoral Association, I had been very actively involved with the Postdoc Association at Vandy, and I remained active in the Vandy Postdoc Association for the duration of my fellowship there. But I also became very actively involved with the National Postdoc Association. And I would encourage, anybody who's interested in getting involved with any sort of organization like this. It can be the NPA, it can be your scientific society, right? All of those places have lots of leadership opportunities for graduate students and postdocs, undergraduates even, and they allow for you to gain a different perspective, right? So the NPA is a nonprofit organization. I've learned a lot about the nonprofit space just by volunteering through that organization. So I started off as a volunteer, early on, and I want to say, 2011 maybe. And then I was a committee leader. I worked for the outreach committee, and I did work there. And then I transitioned to the board of directors. So it's a way to really learn about finances and engaging volunteers and what it's like to put on annual meeting and all of these things. So there's lots and lots of things that you can learn from really getting more involved with whatever society of choice you would like to be involved with. And of course, they could always use your help. So I would reach out to them if that's something that you're interested in. And Customer is another conference that I'm actively involved with. It's the Cultivating Ensembles in STEM Education and Research Conference. That's actually going to be held September 15 to 17 in Chicago, like in 2 months. So lots to go on there. And so I got actively involved with that organization as well. So all of these things to say, right, I have a depth of experience with a whole bunch of different things, and I was able to actually use some of that information to help me be a more competitive candidate for the fellowship. And maybe at the time that I was involved with them, it wasn't like, oh yeah, this is first and foremost in my mind. But as I was able to pursue some of the things that I thought were my passions and some of the things that I thought were really, really interesting, it really made my postdoctoral experience much more fulfilling and made it that much easier for me to go on my interview for AAAS and say, I did all these things and it was really fun. And this is the reason why I did this thing. And this is the reason why I did that thing. So being strategic about how you want to use some of these extracurricular activities and what you'll gain from each individual one is something also to keep in the back of your mind. So, so now the policy fellowship. So the policy fellowship is all about fostering a scientifically informed, evidence-based policy and practice. So what is the AAAS Fellowship about? So it's about engaging scientists and engineers into science policy from a broad range of disciplines and a variety of career stages. So as I was actually saying to Jill earlier, the advantage specifically of the AAAS Fellowship is that there's no time limit, right? So many of these science policy fellowships, if you're interested in different types of science policy fellowships and not necessarily just the AAAS one, please note that there's usually a time limit, right? It's usually 3 to 5 years after you get your PhD. And of course, by the time I decided that I wanted to do a policy fellowship, it was way beyond that for me. So my choices were limited, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind as you're thinking about it. So of course, we want to contribute our knowledge and analytical skills to the federal government. And yes, scientists and engineers are so needed in federal government, right? So our ability to crunch numbers and our ability to look at data in different ways and analyze it in different ways that we do at the bench is so needed in government, right? So we have, the government, for example, NSF collects so much data from their grantees and awardees, and then, and we need the people, we need the manpower to be at NSF to be able to say, okay, we have all this data, we're going to crunch the numbers, we're going to make some recommendations, and then we're going to implement policies to make X or Y programs better. And so that's kind of where we step in. You learn firsthand about policymaking. I mean, there's nothing like being in the middle of a meeting where there's like 14 different federal agencies sitting at the table, and you're kind of sitting in the back of the room like a fly in the wall, but you're just hearing this rich conversation that's happening in the room, and understanding what consensus building is really all about when you have all these federal agencies in the room talking about whatever, and it's just this amazing experience. And then you also want to make sure that we have a science and technology leadership base that is trained in science policy and can actually start addressing these really difficult societal challenges that we have, right? So the government addresses a lot of these challenges, and we need scientists and engineers to help do that, right? Because the attorneys and the politicians, they can't do it on their own, right? We don't really want them to do it on their own. We want to at least give them some information and give them some evidence to make good decisions. So we want the output to be science policy policy savvy scientists and engineers. So again, right, you understand how the branches of government are interacting with one another. I don't see too much with the courts, but definitely there's a Congress and legislative branch all the time. So there are requests from Congress that come into NSF all the time, and NSF needs to have answers to Congress, right? We have to go through and crunch the numbers and figure out what information that we can provide to Congress so that they're informed of the decisions that we're making as an agency. So that happens all the time. So obviously the federal budget has been a very timely issue right now. So understanding how the president's budget is set, how Congress kind of changes that budget as well. But then NSF and all the individual government agencies, they need to create budgets that reflect the president's budget, and then it gets changed from there on in. But it really all is about Congress writing the laws and setting the budget, and then executive agency is figuring out how the details and the policy implementation in order to meet that budget. So, and we also understand stakeholders and other factors affecting policy. Obviously, you want to develop your own capacity as a person who's going through the fellowship. So we do things like, again, as I was saying before, communicating to non-scientific audiences. We do this all the time, and it's really important, right? You want to talk to all the people who are out on the street who are voting, right? They're the voters. They're the people who are making policy on some level, because and we want them to understand so that they can make informed decisions. And so I've done a lot of strategic planning during my time at NSF, both with the Division of Graduate Education on that level and also as, an agency-wide. So, and especially with the administration transition, we're going to be having new strategic plans come out, and those are very, very interesting. They get shaped and molded in all sorts of different ways. And so, again, networking and building alliances. It's all about building these partnerships so that we're not working in silos, right? It's so nice to have these open conversations so that the different federal agencies are talking amongst each other. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit in a group that I'm involved with that actually facilitates that conversation. So, okay, so serving society. So we have two different types of fellows. So there are fellows who are congressional fellows, and there are fellows who are executive branch fellows, and there are some other fellows as well, but those are going to be our two main categories. And so those fellows who are serving as congressional fellows, they can do really cool things. So this person, wrote text for a bill, right? And so that's interesting because you're doing the research on what you found on whatever the bill is about, right? And then you can give, that text to the person in Congress, right, who is going to be making those decisions ultimately. So this is kind of how you are part of this process, right? So that's pretty cool. Again, you organize a press conference, also pretty cool. A lot of congressional fellows do organization of hearings and briefings that happen on the Hill all the time, and so that's something that's really of interest to people. So for the federal agencies, this person is actually working in the Department of State. She actually came and spoke with us during our orientation, and she led some Hurricane Sandy coordinations after the fact. She actually led this design competition so that you could rebuild the shoreline, and it was pretty cool. So she had a lot of really interesting things to say. But you have the drafted fact sheet and super interesting things like this. And so, so this is me. So this is me with my mentor, Jan Middendorf. And so she was the former program director for project and program evaluation at NSF. And so so I worked with Jan during my first year of my fellowship, and we did a lot of project and program evaluation. And so that sounds really foreign. And I'm going to say right now that in September of 2015, when I walked into NSF, it was completely foreign to me as well. I had no idea of what project and program evaluation was, but I knew that I wanted to learn more about it. And so I knew I wanted to learn more about evaluation and assessment. And so working with Jan had about 25 years worth of experience in evaluation. She was actually a social scientist. And so it became this very interesting collaboration between the two of us that it was the social scientist meets, the hard scientist. And then we had this conversation of when we were developing workshops and having workshops for the different program officers to talk about program evaluation. It was, we'd go through the slide deck, and in, slide 2 or 3, I would say, nope, yeah, you lost me. So it was kind of this collaboration between the two of us to make sure that, she had this great level of expertise, and I was coming in from the scientist, I don't really know what you're talking about perspective. And so we kind of came to a happy medium where it was understandable to all. And so that was that was one of the greatest advantages of working with Jan, is that, she was coming from a totally different perspective. I was coming from this perspective, and we met in the middle. And so it was so in many ways, it was about communication and communicating across non-scientific audiences. So that was something that we did. We did a lot of evaluating the program reports that come through, and it wasn't just in the graduate education space. It was throughout the division of the education directorate. So we did K to 12, we did undergrad, we did grad, so we did all sorts of things. I also point out the interagency partnership support. So that's been something I was tasked with this year. And so under the Obama administration, there was a call to have these interagency working groups that spanned all sorts of different topics. So there's a P12, there's a grad, there's an undergrad. There are ones on water, there's ones on food safety, there's ones on computer science, there's ones on whatever, right? So there's a lot of these different interagency working groups. And so basically I was tasked with being the executive secretary or the executive lead for the graduate education interagency working group. So this is a working group that's made up of 14 different federal agencies. We get together monthly and we have conversations about what's going on in grad ed. How can we do things at the federal level that makes things easier for everyone, right? How does it streamline the processes for the people working in graduate education at the institutions of higher education? And how does it make it easier for us to make informed decisions as federal agencies providing funding for those grad ed programs? And so we have like really great, intense, in-depth conversations, but a lot of it is about, working, a lot of it is about, cross-talking with all these different people, connecting with all these different people. It's been a great networking experience for me because you're building these relationships with different partners. And one of the perks is that you actually get to go to the White House on occasion. So on Monday, we were able to go to the White House for an executive secretary meeting, and it was very, very fun. It's always fancy when you get to go to the White House. So anyway, these are some of the things that I've done as a fellow. So again, I did a lot of capacity building within EHR, which is the Education Directorate. So it's Education and Human Resources. That's our acronym. If you do a science policy fellowship, you will learn to love acronyms because there are lots and lots of them. And so basically, I also was involved with this Dear Colleague letter, which is basically a letter to the community from NSF that asks for them to submit proposals on a given topic. So the topic that we worked on specifically was about convergence, which is, for all intents and purposes, it's like a higher level of interdisciplinarity, right? And so it's starting to think about how do we train graduate students or postdocs, at that level, or even at the undergraduate level, how do we train them to be more diverse in terms of the disciplines that they feel comfortable communicating with each other and talking their language of different disciplines? So that's something that NSF is actually very interested in, is starting to think more broadly about how do we make these multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary scientists, right, at the convergence level, which is kind of even higher than that level. We had a federal STEM graduate seminar series that was part of the interagency working group things. I was involved with a science and engineering indicators workshop where we talked a little bit about actually changing the science and engineering indicators and talking about how to make them better, how to make them more accessible to different types of stakeholders who are using the data from the science and engineering indicators. So that was something that actually was totally advantageous. So I came into my fellowship and I started working with Jan, and it just happened to be that Jan was, kind of an expert meeting facilitator. So she had a lot of experience with facilitation, and it was something that I was very interested in, and I said, can you teach me some of the pointers and kind of involve me with that, because I think it's kind of interesting. And so that was something that we actually did together. We co-facilitated this together, and I learned a skill that was never even on the radar when I decided to accept the position in the Division of Graduate Education. So that was great. It's a total bonus. GRIP, so I was involved with the Graduate Research Internship Program. We also had a meeting in June 2016 that I was involved with facilitating the meeting as well as writing the report. And then also, obviously, this year, has been more committed to interagency working group things and also the budget as well. So it's been a pretty intense 2 years. So here are the placements. So as you can see, placements are everywhere, right? They're throughout the federal government. So what I will say, I think USAID, I believe, has the most fellows. I can't say for this year's placement, but I think USAID typically has the most fellows, like upwards of 50 and beyond. NSF is going to have about, I think we have 40, 42 fellows right now between first and second years. And then NIH also, there are actually a fair number of fellows who are at NIH as well. And then they're like kind of scattered throughout. So they're in a lot of different places. And typically, I don't think FDA is on here. But there are people in FDA, there are people in NIJ, which is the National Institutes of Justice. So they're all over the place. What I can say is that this was actually our group. I'm over here somewhere, and it was an extremely hot day in Washington, D.C., but you can appreciate that because it's extremely humid here as well. So there are about 261 fellows, so lots and lots of fellows. 160 first-year fellows and about 94 second-year fellows. Many of the second-year fellows either go back to their positions. Some of them are on sabbatical from their academic position. Some of them have put off accepting an academic position or accepting another job for a year to come do the fellowship. There were several people that I knew who did that last year. As you can see, the majority are executive branch fellows, okay? So the majority are executive branch fellows, but we do have congressional fellows. We have about 35 congressional fellows. As a side note, AAAS only sponsors 2 congressional fellows. However, the rest of the 33 fellows are sponsored by partner societies. So if you go onto the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship webpage, you can click onto the partner societies and see whether your favorite scientific society is represented there. Like mathematics has one, ophthalmology has one. There's a lot of astrophysics. There's a lot of physics. So a lot of these different professional societies sponsor a congressional fellow. And the thing about the congressional fellows is that they go through, and I can talk a little bit more about it, but they go through the same orientation that we go through as executive branch fellows. So everybody's all together for those first 2 weeks of the fellowship with this in-depth immersion in what the federal government is all about. Everybody's all together. So yeah. And then, so fellowship areas. So again, so applicants can apply up to 2 program areas. And I would encourage you that if you put all this work in to put together an application, you might as well apply for 2 areas because you've already done all the work. So, but you do need, I believe that you do need 2 sets of letters of recommendation, but they can be from the same people. They just need to go to 2 different places. So with the executive branch, I mean, I can say that I've done most of this. I've definitely collected, analyzed information. I've worked on websites and reports. I've prepared for hearings as well in terms of my second year. Absolutely interagency collaborations I've been involved with, and absolutely evaluation on some level, and implementing and planning events. So I've done all of those types of things. On the congressional, they're going to serve on Capitol Hill. So basically, you don't see the congressional fellows. They go off, and they're on the Hill, and every once in a while you see them at a professional development event, and they're just kind of like but they have such a good time. They just say nothing but wonderful things about their experience. Although it's kind of definitely harried, depending on what bills are passing, what things are going on in Congress, because it's a very, very high-paced environment. There's judicial branch. So judicial branch is going to be something that is also available. I believe that the judicial branch and the Roger Revelle are open to people who have, I think, 3 years worth of postdoc experience. So you do need to be a little bit more advanced in order to apply for these 2. But I would encourage you to look into those if those 2 are things that you're interested in. Areas of interest, they can run the gamut. So any number of things. You can do healthcare, mental health, family concerns. You can do like the foreign policy kind of stuff, international stuff, agriculture, food, water, environment, energy. You can, for me, the education, STEM, and science communication spoke to me, and that's what I ended up actually doing. What I will say is that when you get placed in your placement, it just happened to be that I managed to find a placement where I could pursue education and science communication. But there are many, fellows who end up doing something completely outside their wheelhouse. Like, okay, it could have been just as probable for me to end up in like nuclear weapons, and it would be a great experience because I would learn something else. And so, we have all these different things. And then professional development. So in terms of professional development, part of the fellowship program is the fellow's professional development. So it is about your professional development. It's not about being chained to your office all the time, right? So it's about your professional development and making sure that you're gaining what you need from your fellowship. And so it's really keeping that open lines of communication with your program officer at AAAS and whomever is in charge of the fellows in your own organization. But some of the things that we do is that we do have this 2-week orientation, which is pretty intense. It's a total submersion into government. It's like, oh my gosh, congressional, executive, history, what Office of Budget Management and Budget are doing, what OSTP does, how laws are made, how budget is made, what do you do, So it's all of this. I think it's upwards of 50 plus hours worth of time over the course of those 2 weeks. And then there's monthly workshops. So there can be like 1 to 2 monthly workshops on policy, leadership, communication. So those are going to be your major themes that happen during the monthly workshops. And then there's a career summit that happens in January where they invite back alums of the program in all different sectors, and you can talk with them like, okay, what'd you do during your fellowship? And then say, okay, can I find experiences in my fellowship to help me move into this sector or that sector, and this is what I want to do. It just helps you build connections and network. Year-end summit is just kind of like an end of the year thing for us. Again, it's networking. And then there's affinity groups. So affinity groups are, there's lots of different affinity groups. And so because I am a glutton for punishment, I lead 3 different affinity groups, or I actually co-lead 3 different affinity groups. So I lead the Federal Innovation and Research Evaluation, the Higher Education one, and the Scientists with Improv Skills. So obviously my interests, okay? So the thing about the affinity groups is that they kind of come and go as people come into the fellowship program. So if people are not interested in biofuels this year and nobody wants to lead that affinity group, it might fall off, but it might come back in a few years. So these are affinity groups. They're informal gatherings of fellows who have interest in these things. We typically, bring speakers in and have them, typically after work, and we just have a good time together. And people come in and talk with us. And again, it's another networking opportunity that we can do. And so again, right, you have fellows in all different sectors. So you have fellows in government, in academia, private sector, and nonprofit. So all of these people working everywhere. So how do you be a competitive candidate? All right, so if you are interested in applying for the AAAS Fellowship, what I would do, I would encourage you to go onto the website. I would encourage you, or any science policy fellowship for that matter, and there's, I believe it's like eligibility or application guidelines, something of that sort, and you can find the list of attributes of how they evaluate their candidates. And so things like having a strong science and technology credentials, right? So, but based on where you are in your career, right? If you're further on in your career, they're going to want to see a little bit more, that you've done. If you're early on in your career, then that's okay. I mean, I thought that this was going to totally tank me, in all honesty, and it didn't, right? So even if you think that your credentials, could be stronger, I would still encourage you to apply. Again, your problem-solving abilities, right, are key to making the government work smoothly. So, you really have an amazing skill set. So also there's a public service and a serving society part to this, right? So you need to do that as well. Having leadership capacity, showing your ability to adapt and be flexible is really important because again, right, you may end up in an office where it's not in your wheelhouse and you're just like, all right, but I'm going to take it on and I'm going to go with it and I'm going to apply whatever I know about, my science to a different field, and that's what they're talking about in terms of your flexibility. And you need to be flexible too, because there are fires that come up all the time, and whatever you're doing, yeah, it's not important anymore, and now you're doing this. So there's lots of that flexibility that needs to happen, and obviously communication skills and social issues that influence policy. So in terms of the application deadline, so application opens May 1st. It's open now. It's going to be, the applications are due on November 1st. By the first week of February, you'll get a notification of whether you get an interview or not. I know this is a really long process. So you get in the first week of February, it's like, okay, I've got a semifinalist interview. And then the semifinalist interviews are going to happen February 26th to March 9th. These are actually posted on the website. And basically, you're going to have a Skype interview. So the semifinalist interviews are by Skype. It's going to be you with like 8 or 9 people on the other side of Skype listening to what you have to say for a half hour. And I can talk a little bit more about that interview if you're interested. But you'll also have to prepare a briefing memo before that Skype interview. We can talk a little bit about that too. But then if you pass the semifinalist round and you get selected for a final to be a finalist, the finalist interview week is going to be 5 days in mid-April, and you are required to be there for that 5 days. It is a crazy 5 days of just going on interviews. So typically what happens is that you have some pre-scheduled interviews and that you also have some that are not. And so before finalist week, like a few days before, not very many, but you get a giant packet of different types of jobs, right, that are available in the different offices who are looking for fellows. And you go through that packet and you say, okay, you pick out however many and say, I want to try and pursue an interview in this office. And you are not allowed to contact those offices until finalist week. So until they say go, you can't do it because they don't want a bunch of emails coming in from, fellows wanting things. They want to kind of limit it to the 1 week, which makes sense. So then you go, and then over the course of that week, you can schedule interviews during that time. And so for me, just given my interest, I was NSF-NIH all week. It was me and the Metro. We loved each other for like a long week. And so you have that, and then your placement offers are extended May to June. And how this happens is that after you have your interviews, you rank your offices that you were interested in, one to whatever. And then the offices themselves rank the people that they interviewed one to whatever. And then AAAS does this, like, I don't know what kind of algorithm they have or whatever massive like whiteboard that they have going on, but then they do matching, right? And so they match all the people. And then when you get your match, you have like 24 hours to make a decision, right? Because then if you decide not to take that, then it moves on to the next person. So it's like this really intricate system, but it works. And then the fellowships begin on September 1st. So if you want to live chat with fellows, I believe that they're doing it once a month from now until November. So you can look that up on the website as well. And here are some other resources that are available to you. I won't go into them too much, and I'll wrap up now. But application deadline is November 1st. You know that. Do definitely look at the Partner Society fellowships if you're interested in more congressional style fellowships. Mass media is an option. California Policy Fellowships is an interesting one. That it's a program that's been around for, I believe, 9 years now. The interesting thing about California is that they have spearheaded some additional what do I want to say? They've funded some other states to have similar policy fellowships, so I think those will be up and coming. So it's just something to kind of keep on the back of your radar. Is that other states I think are kind of gaining momentum, and they're also going to be offering policy fellowships. Christine Mirzayan is a 12-week fellowship. I looked it up this morning. So it's a much shorter fellowship, so that might be something that people can do as well. And then one of the professional associations that actually has a good science policy page is the FASAB. So FASAB.org, I guess, has a great science policy page. So if you look there, you can see a lot of these resources as well. So I just want to say, I can leave this up, but thank you. There's my email. I have a stack of cards. There are flyers, I believe, in the back. I'm going to stay here and answer any questions, and I thank you for your time.
How many people actually receive these fellowships versus applications? Like what percentage acceptance is there?
So I'm guessing, I think that the most recent number I heard was approximately 1 to 10. I mean, don't quote me on that, but I think that that's about the number that they typically have. It definitely ranges over the different years, depending on, you know, the administration, depending on whether people have interest in it. So, but of what I've heard, that's kind of the number I've heard.
Along the lines of his question, if you're a doctoral candidate and you're going to graduate before the fellowship starts, are you eligible to apply?
So Jill can answer that question.
Okay. So I looked that up because that's probably going to be my situation. And it said no. And then I went to the FAQs where someone was like, really? But, you know, like, I will definitely have my PhD when it starts. And explicitly in the FAQs, it even said, no, you have to have your PhD when you're applying.
Yeah, you have to have the PhD like as of November 1st, like when you apply, it needs to be in hand. I know they're a real stickler about that, but they do, you know, but it is very broad in terms of when you can apply. So,
Can you describe what your work week is like?
yeah, definitely. So I'll get to work. I'll get to work on Monday, and I'll try to open my email and see what, you know, what catastrophic things have happened over the weekend, you know, that we need to deal with, or what catastrophic things have happened as of like 8 a.m. on Monday morning. And typically, right, and so as I said before, you need to be flexible and need to be able to say, okay, you know, this has come up right now and I needed to address this right now. I need to go down the hall. I need to talk to this person. I need to find that person. I need to email a person at a different federal agency or call them up on the phone and be like, we need to handle this right now. I go to a lot of meetings. So I'm constantly in meetings, constantly on telecons, with different people at different agencies, different groups. I work with my mentor who does more policy and budget type things, and those things are definitely more of an urgent nature. So when I did an evaluation and assessment, it's kind of like, okay, we have this evaluation report, and you know, sometimes there's urgency to it. Like if things are you know, a report or a statement of work is going to the Office of Management and Budget, and there's a deadline, you know, that needs to be met. There might be some urgency, but when things come down from Congress and you need to find the data to answer X question or Y question from Congress, you need to handle that pretty much immediately, and that is your full focus for whatever period of time. So often I would say, you know, I try to make as many meetings as are normally scheduled meetings, but it often becomes this juggling act of I'm triple booked for 1 p.m. through 3 p.m. and I kind of need to make a decision about what's the most important priority. And it's just fun. I mean, it's people coming in and out of your office all day long. I need to ask you a question, or this came up, or that came up. So it's very, very dynamic in that respect. And I would say, as I was saying to Sina before, we have an open office, and so oftentimes it's just like, where do I find a quiet space to get done what I have to get done? And there are those times too where you just have to tell people, I can't, I have to reach a deadline by 5 p.m. or whatever, and I gotta go. So, but yeah, it's really fun. I go to DC often, so there are congressional hearings and briefings that are open to the public. If there's one on, something science related that's of my own interest, like on microbiology or what have you, I usually go to those. Or something that's important to whatever I'm doing at NSF, like on higher ed or whatever, I go to those. AAAS as a professional society often holds things in the evenings or during the day. There's the professional development as part of the fellowship program that I go to. So those are scheduled over the course of the week. So it's busy, busy, busy. It's go, go, go. And it's really fun. I mean, there's never really a dull moment. Actually, there's never a dull moment.
So in terms of, I guess, next steps once you're done with the fellowship, so I'm guessing you're at the NSF now, and
yes.
You plan on staying there, or you?
No, so I likely won't stay at NSF. So what I will say is that in some instances, the fellows who are at NIH transition sometimes to jobs at NIH. That typically doesn't happen at NSF because they typically are looking for more senior individuals than what are normally AAAS fellows. So that very rarely happens at NSF, happens more frequently at NIH. For me, I'm planning on, I have lots of options open to me, so I'm thinking more nonprofit. I'm thinking more going back into academia because those two things are of interest to me. Going into the government right now, of course, is extremely difficult because of the hiring freeze. Many of my colleagues were able to get in kind of under the gun right before January 20th, and they just made the cut to transition into a government position. But for those of us who are kind of there, it's just a difficult time period right now.
Okay. And excuse me. And just in terms of what you decide to make your next step, does the fellowship limit you in any kind of way? Like, does it say that if you're going for this fellowship, we expect you to go into government or
Oh,
something?
yeah. No, not at all. Yeah, I would say that, the world is your oyster. As soon as you leave the fellowship, I mean, they encourage you to go into all different sectors. Yeah, the more places that policy savvy scientists can find themselves, I think the better. They want it scattered throughout.
Okay, so my question is, if you have an interest in education and higher education, what other opportunities can you have? Like, you work at NSF, but if you work at NIH, is the opportunities kind of similar, or kind of can you describe?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there is the education directorate at NSF. So there are opportunities, there are probably a higher percentage of opportunities in that higher education space at NSF just because it's NSF. But at NIH, there's I don't want to say the name of the office, but it's like the workforce office. I don't remember the exact name of the NIH office, but that deals with higher ed all the time. There was a person, actually, I was just talking to Sina about, a friend of mine at the DoD worked, and his project was mainly education-based as well. People at EPA that I've known, former fellows, they've worked on a lot of education. So there's lots of education going on at the different agencies. It just that might be like, oh yeah, this is glaringly obvious because education and DoD, that's an interesting combo, right? But there was a fellow there who did it for a year-long stint.
So my next question is that you would find out those opportunities during that interview week. It will say like which each department has those type of education that you can apply.
So you would get your packet, and then you can kind of just like scroll through and see which job announcements have something to do with education, right? The majority of them are going to be at NSF, but there will be a lot of other ones that are scattered throughout.
Okay.
I was just wondering, what's the percentage of time that you'd be learning a new skill that isn't, I mean, obviously it's not science at the bench related, but like economics, for instance. And will you be writing a lot of papers or do research per se, or is there opportunities for that using like economic principles?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. What I would say is that there are definitely opportunities for whatever opportunities you want to make. So as I can speak from my experience at NSF. I can't necessarily speak to other agencies, but I'm sure I can connect you with some other people. But I think that most fellows would say that when you go into an office, you can kind of craft your own experience. So for example, right, so my mentor, my evaluation mentor, actually had to transition back to her home institution in June of last year. So then that kind of left me open to say, okay, well, what new skill do I want to learn? Like I learned about evaluation last year. I'm still very interested in it, but I don't want to spend this whole year doing evaluation. And so that's why I chose to work with the interagency working group. I chose to do some stuff on policy and budget because it was something I didn't have a skill set with. And so I kind of tailored my experience to what I wanted to learn. And I think that a lot of people do that. So if you want to be writing policy papers and that's what you want to do, then find the job descriptions that say you'll be doing, you know, these are your expected responsibilities, right? And there's a way. And like even if you get in an office and you say, okay, I need to do this, you know, you often have the flexibility to say, well, I think that this project is really cool. So can I like work on this project? I don't think anybody's going to tell you no. People are like, oh, I volunteer. I will take you. Yeah, so there's lots of flexibility with that too.
Did you have another question?
So you're focusing on higher education, correct?
Yes.
So do you know of anyone that's in a fellowship program that's focusing on like secondary education, say high school or maybe parts of middle school? Because like the interest for me is if I got into something like this, I want to go back to my home state, Louisiana, and work on stuff because the science education there is not very good.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so, yeah.
There's definitely. So in the Directorate for Education and Human Resources at NSF, they have, I mean, they focus on all different kinds. So I just happen to be in the Division of Graduate Education. There's undergraduate education. There's the Division on Research and Learning, and then there's Human Resource Development. So between Human Resource Development and Division on Research and Learning, they fund a lot of programs that are in middle school, high school, like any of the K to 12. So I would envision seeing you in that space where they work on programs for those particular age groups. You probably find those things in other agencies as well, perhaps less so, but you can definitely find places that are doing those types of initiatives at the younger age.
And in terms, like, I guess the level you're working at, is this more of a federal or are you thinking more state level in terms of what?
Oh, this is, so the majority of what we do is federal level. Certainly there's that state focus for, you know, those particular programs that are funded, right? So NSF funds particular programs and they just happen to fall in whatever states where they are. I mean, we look at it as a program, but I mean, there is some state influence, you know, as a result of the funding.
Thank you so much for your great talk. I'm hoping, like everyone else, like me, have like learned so much about internationals. Like to my understanding, most of these fellowships are only offered to citizens and permanent residents. Other than National Academy's Mirzayan Fellowship,
Yeah.
could you recommend any other fellowship opportunities for internationals? Thank you.
I'm wondering whether, off the top of my head, I'm not sure whether the California Science and Technology Policy Fellowship might be open to internationals. I'm not 100% sure, and I would hope that they're going to start incorporating internationals as part of the new state fellowships that are coming out. But I know that, but yes, you're correct. The Mirzayan Fellowship through the National Academies is open to everybody. Yeah. Okay, thank you.